introduction, a talk by Dr. Christoph Thun-Hohenstein, who will talk about climate care and why we need the arts. And then followed by Dr. Monica Gagliano, who will join us online. She cannot join when she's joining us, I think, from Australia online, and she will talk about the mind of plants. Then we will have a short Q&A, and we will proceed with the next slide. Then Dr. Martin Fosser from the Biologiezentrum, he will introduce plants, botanical collection, and their implications on the culture and the arts. And then Magister Gabriele Winkler, he will make a talk on cultural connotations of plants, and I think she will also do a demonstration about the workshops and her practice with herbal drinks and mix and preparations. And then I will do also a little introduction to the topic of my PhD on interspecies collaboration and artistic research methods. And after we will have another Q&A and a short Q&A. And then Christa will conclude with a little talk on seeing plants through art and her relationship with plants and her artistic practice. And finally, we will have a beautiful a video prepared by Sommerer from the Leisenhof Gärtnerei, and she will that she prepared, where she's going to present the Leisenhof garden and the kind of like methods and the philosophy of the garden. It's a garden up here in the near in front of the Petrinum in the how is it called? Postlimberg. And then we will have a general discussion, and we will dance, have some drinks, and then we will listen to the Gartenlaube Waltz, and eventually we can all dance a waltz.
So thank you so much, Fabricio, for this short overview. These are our speakers today, but you will hear more about them soon. And I will have now the pleasure to switch to Diane Ayton-Shenker, who has prepared a welcome presentation for us. She's the CEO of Leonardo ISAST. As you know, Leonardo is a really important network from MIT Press, and
hello, hello, and welcome, Ars Electronica, friends and family from across the Leosphere, the world of Leonardo, and our fellow travelers in the journey of art, science, and technology. This is the first Laser Linz, and on behalf of Leonardo, we are thrilled to welcome a newcomer to our laser network. I am Diana Ayton-Shenker. I am proud to serve as the CEO of Leonardo, the International Society of Art, Science, Technology, and the Executive Director of our partnership with Arizona State University, home also to Laser ASU, where I'm privileged to serve as professor as well. Joining our network, the Laser Linz becomes, I believe, the 48th member. We're now in even 4 dozen of lasers hosted around the world, bringing together cutting-edge, mind-blowing, mind-bending ideas and people and projects who are reshaping our world through a creativity lens that applies the best of human ingenuity and imagination to envision what our world could become through this creativity lens, through arts-centered innovation and inventiveness and real impact. I hope that everyone enjoys today's laser and all the lasers to come, as well as the rest of the rich offerings through Ars Electronica. I am very thankful to our partners, all those presenting and making possible today's Laser Linz. Thank you so much, and we are looking forward to continuing with you to do good work in the world with Leonardo and Ars Electronica, and now Laser Linz.
So we are handing over now to Christiana Kazakou, and welcome, and please tell us a bit more.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and we're really excited to have you as part of our program. Thank you for everyone who is here and who is attending also online. And I would like to start with a short intro about Leonardo. It was conceived back in 1968 by kinetic artist and aeronautical pioneer Frank Malina. And the main aim actually of the journal was to bridge the gap between science and humanities by creating a space for free exchange of knowledge that had no space in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Since then, the Leonardo network has grown into a global think tank spanning over 80 countries. Can we? Yes, thank you. Can you go to the next one? Sorry. Yes, so nowadays, the Leonardo forces a transformation at the nexus of art, science, and technology. Yes. Because complex problems require creative solutions, we serve to empower an inclusive global network, a borderless community, where all belong in pursuit of a more vibrant, just, and generative world. We do this by operating as a full-cycle creative engine, creating impact through creative services, community, convening, education, residencies, research, and media. We have a long-term partnership with MIT Press, and through our publications, print and online, we have a series of book series, Leonardo Alamac, also the lab, and review section. Sorry, can you? Our second strand is the programming activities, and more recently we have a collaboration with Arizona State University. And our current programs are the Leonardo Laser Talks, the Cryptech Incubator, the Leonardo Liftoff Platform, the Leo Labs, and the Leonardo Index. In the next years, we're looking to transform systems, amplify networks, incubate ideas, and harness creativity and collaboration with partners worldwide. One of our most international programs is the Laser Talks. It was conceived back in 2008 from cultural historian Piero Scaruffi, as a local forum for presenting art and science projects underway in the Bay Area. Leonardo Laser Talks are a program of international gatherings that brings artists, scientists, humanists, and technologists together for informal presentations, performances, and conversations with a wider public. The main concept behind the talks is to democratize dialogue and transnational collaborations between practitioners and people from the different disciplines. So our local mission is to encourage a contribution to the cultural environment of a region by fostering interdisciplinary dialogue and opportunities for community building. And our broader mission is to contribute to bridging the gap between the two cultures, humanities and sciences, as well as bridging the gap between the two cultures and the wider public. Our laser talks, they have been presenting over 5 continents, 47 cities, and we have more than 47 hosts at the moment, and they take place in different settings, such as academic, cultural and scientific organizations, independent spaces like artist studios, and more recently online. In the context of the Ars Electronica, we experimented with the new format and our online presence. So we have put on together a garden, the Garden Leonardo Laser, where you can explore projects and participations from our 21 participating laser hosts. And our program, actually, Interdisciplinary Topographies, brings together our global network of artists, scientists, humans, and technologies in a series of hybrid formats, performances, talks, online exhibitions, addressing the world's most pressing issues. Grounded in the UN sustainability goals, our garden cultivates our values of equity and inclusion in a wide exploration of global challenges, digital communications, placemaking, space networks, and systems. We have actually 5 programming strands. The first one is performing new infrastructures, interbeing between complex systems, architecting global communities, future casting, and the final is the garden gazebo, and this is the reason we are here, and we are very excited to welcome the interface cultures and the university into our program. I would also like to thank the Leonardo Laser team for supporting this initiative, the Laser Committee, as well all our laser hosts that participated in this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christiana. It's really a big pleasure that we are now part of the Leonardo Laser host network, and we are very proud to be part of it. And you just mentioned burning issues, and I think there's nobody more competent to tell us about the most burning issue, which is, of course, nowadays the climate care and climate issues. And we are very happy to have with us Dr. Thun-Hohenstein, Christoph Thun-Hohenstein, who is the director of the Vienna Biennale of Change for Change. And he will tell us about what he has been working on for many years now on the issue of climate care and climate love. And so welcome. And please tell us about your research and why it is important to bring art and science together in this laser talk format.
Thank you very much, Christa. Well, first of all, congratulations to Linz on becoming part of this network, which is key. The Vienna Biennale for Change, which I initiated a couple of years ago, is passionate about working together with science and research institutions. We have done that also at the current Biennale, which actually has the title Planet Love and the subtitle Climate Care in the Digital Age. And there you already see 3 key elements regarding the planet love, care. We have to take care of our climate and lots of related issues. And of course, we still are and will be for a long time in the digital age. So we also have to bring that component or that very important aspect and key driver of innovation together with the others. A couple of days ago, we had the Planet Matters conference, which is the main conference of the Vienna Biennale for Change 2021 at the Architectural Center Vienna. And the most renowned and important architect working with clay, Anna Heringer, gave a keynote lecture. At the end she said, the old question for architecture and design is form follows and then what? Function, emotion, whatever. She talked a lot about beauty. And I wrote an essay last year called Climate Beauty, and I'm a big fan of the notion of beauty. At the MAC, we also did an exhibition on the topic. So she said beauty has such a key role in our life that I would say form follows love. And there you are. So I felt really kind of good in many ways, because when I proposed the notion of planet love 2 years ago, some people thought, isn't that kitschy a little bit? No, it's not. We have to take it seriously, and we have to move from there. So I will briefly talk about terminology. I used to call the age we live in digital modernity, a term that I'm sure is welcome here in Linz with all the digital things you have going on here. But I always said it has to become an eco-social digital modernity. And in the last couple of, let's say half a year ago, I said, no, I have to change terminology, because climate is even more important. I think it's really the biggest challenge to mankind. So I talk now of climate modernity. You can like the term or not, but it just says that this is really at the center. And when we talk about climate modernity, it's also about the social dimensions. It's about biological diversity. It's about the quality of ecosystems. And it's also, and this is key, about circularity. Yeah. And I want to say a few words on these terms. Climate care is everything that's kind of geared to contributing in a positive way to the climate issue. It could be for-profit, business models for companies. It can be not-for-profit. It can be voluntary work, and lots of other things. These are all, as long as it's really helping the climate and the whole issue and all the related topics, you can call it climate care. Another word, and you mentioned it in the written introduction, is climate digital. Why? Because we still underestimate and neglect the potential of digital technologies to help us with climate care. If you say climate and digital are the key two topics of our age, and the European Commission under Ursula von der Leyen is doing exactly that, and it's, I think, the right way to do it, then the next logical idea is, how can these two spheres come together? And rather than doing another startup with digital entertainment, why don't we have many more startups and also larger companies working on climate care with digital means? This is a key thing. So this is something I really want to push also with the Vienna Biennale for change in the future, because we need digital technologies. And climate social is another term that's important in several respects. I mentioned two. On the one hand, we've had all this discussion about automation and loss of jobs and artificial intelligence kind of doing away with human jobs. Now we have the Green Deal and all the related issues, which is a huge work machinery also for humans. And it's about meaningful jobs, you know. And we have to create those jobs. We have as many as possible for humans, also working with digital technologies, no problem about that, quite to the contrary. But there's a new job landscape unfolding, and we have to make use of it. Meaningful jobs for the future. When you work on the environment, on climate, etc., you really do a meaningful job. So climate social is this component, but it's also about not leaving anybody behind. Yeah? And new modernity always has the risks of leaving people behind. The same goes for the digital, as we know, and also have learned during Corona, many people not being able to access digital tools. So don't leave anybody behind is a key topic also in the climate issue. I tend to irritate a lot of people when I talk about perspectives. There is an indigenous principle that is very important and dear to me, which is a so-called 7-generation principle. And you know why it's so important? Because nowadays, a couple of decades ago, or let's say centuries ago even, you would have said, okay, 7 generations is 140 years. Nowadays, you would rather say it's 200 years. Who in a short-term world would kind of apply such long-term thinking? I think it's absolutely necessary. Why? The principle basically says that everything we do today, privately, politically, economically, publicly, whatever, everything we do, we should also measure, before doing it, measure in terms of their impact on the 7th generation from now, yeah? Which is 200 years. You can imagine it's not easy to do that. In order to be able to do that, you have to get an idea what would be the ideal world I would wish people in 200 years to live in. Yeah? And if you do that, you get in a kind of really interesting discussion. Of course, it will be decarbonized, etc., etc. But you can develop lots of interesting ideas, and especially the arts, with the compliance of science, can do that. Because you need to have a good understanding of the direction you want to go, also what's necessary, but then the doors are open for a world of worlds, futures full of fantasy, where you can go into. And I think we need, and the Vienna Biennale certainly is one of the, let's say, mechanisms in a good position to do that. We need to foster visions for the next 200 years in order to be able to be really smart and wise about the steps in the coming years, because if I have a pretty good idea from today's perspectives on the basis also of the latest research, what I would wish for the 7th generation in the future, then I can really think in a much clearer way about, let's say, what to do in the next couple of years, what is really key. Of course, decarbonization is key, but the other topic is circular. And this is something that's not in the head of most people yet. We all have to become a circular society. Linz has to become a circular city. We have to become circular citizens. Why? Because the future of growth, also economic growth, is in the term circular. Why? Because once you work in cycles and do not produce any waste, and you produce with green renewable energies, there is no reason why growth shouldn't be allowed. You know, you can have designers, architects design new things every year as they did in the past without major extraction of new resources. So that's the only way and the only direction we can go where we can avoid a degrowth discussion, which is of course there and very important, but which you can't sell to politicians, business people, nor to the man of the, and woman of the street. So you need growth, you need the dynamic also of economic and growth, and you have a possibility to do so. So that's all kind of turn circular. What we'll see is the circular turn. We are kind of at the beginning. The EU does a lot of it, but it's not in the heads yet. Yeah? And what we have to combine, and this is for me the key direction also for the Vienna Biennale in the future, is to combine climate, including biodiversity, because it's all connected, yeah, and circular. There we have to go. And don't forget the commons. The more we use the commons, the better. The more we have cooperatives working also kind of with a commons spirit, the better also for the mechanisms we need. How do I look time-wise? 5 minutes to go. Okay. So this is where we have to start, and going into the direction of circular society. It's not only, of course, about these cycles, biological cycles, technical cycles, but it's really about thinking all the time, how can I have a good life, yeah, with the minimal extraction of new resources. And the major problem we face is the following. We all know that we are at the beginning of a great transformation in the economy, but also in our societies, yeah, because of climate change, decarbonization, biodiversity, loss of species, etc., etc. Okay, but a great transformation means a huge extraction of new resources. Just one example, think of electric cars replacing internal combustion cars. You can't necessarily recycle what's in an internal combustion car 100% for an electric car. You need a lot of new resources for the electric cars. So you can imagine that a great transformation affords a much bigger extraction of resources than you would have in normal times. Yeah? And this is the main reason why we have to think circular in a big way immediately in order to keep this additional great transformation cost, extraction of new resources to a minimum. You know, when you extract new resources and produce something, let's say this is you have huge emissions. When you do it within cycles, you usually have 20% of the emissions you have when you extract new resources. So it's a huge difference, and it can become even less. So even for our CO2 goals, it's key that we turn circular. And these are just one example. And the problem is that a lot of circular resources are in infrastructure, buildings, streets, etc. but also we all have them at home. I would think that there is not a single person here who hasn't got an old smartphone at home, but there are resources, precious resources in old smartphones, so you need to give them back in order to have the right people to kind of take out the valuable stuff. Yeah, it's just one small example. I will finish with that because I think what we need now is a brilliant partnership between science and the arts in order to come up really with visions. I kind of avoid the term utopias, then you get in the utopia-dystopia discussion. I think it's rather about visions where we want to be in 200 years in order to take the right decisions within the next years and take the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this really very inspiring presentation. And I think there's no better place to talk about visions than an art school. That's why we are here. And I think we hope to also go back to the question a bit later on, what the artists can do about this. Because I think we are also, and that's why it's so brilliant to have this new partnership with Leonardo, because that's really the place where art and science, you know, has a very long tradition of collaboration. But before we go to the more artistic side, let's listen to a really, really brilliant lady, Dr. Monica Gagliano, evolutionary biologist, ecologist from the Botanical Biological Intelligence Lab in Australia, and she's joining us now, hopefully online, very soon, directly from the forest somewhere in Australia. We didn't ask her where she is, so we hope her internet connection is working well. And Monica Gagliano, maybe until this is working.
Yeah.
Oh, she's already here. Super. Hello, Monica. We don't see you, but we hear you.
I can see you.
Okay. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
So we are so happy. From where are you joining us? In which forest?
I'm actually, I'm joining you from Arakwal country, which is in the Banjaman nation. That's the traditional custodians people of this land. The other name is the North.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, Monica, please tell us a bit about the mind of plants and the amazing research you're doing and the books you have been writing recently. Because we are talking here about climate care and climate love, and I think this is something that really fits well to you, especially plant love.
To the previous presentation, and I cannot agree more. And I do have some ideas on how to do exactly that marriage between art and science. And funny enough, one of my close collaborators for this project, the name is Resonant Earth, because he uses sound and resonance to regenerate in general, not just replanting trees, but regenerate the planet at all levels, including the human spirit and humanity as part of that. And my collaborator is also here tonight at a different panel, Leah Barkley. So I think we are actually onto it more than we realize. But what I wanted to start with was actually a poem. I woke up this morning thinking, yeah, that is the right poem. It's by Mary Oliver. And the poem is, Do Stones Feel? And it goes something like this. Do stones feel? Do they love their life? Or does their patience drown out everything else? When I walk on the beach, I gather a few, white ones, dark ones, the multiple colors. Don't worry, I say, I will bring you back, and I do. Is the tree, as he rises delighted with its many branches, each one like a poem? Are the clouds glad to unburden their bundles of rain? Most of the world says, no, it's not possible. I refuse to think to such a conclusion. Too terrible it would be to be wrong. The reason why I'm sharing this poem is because it really pretty much summarizes my research in a very poetic way. And possibly we need more poetry and more poetic language to describe where we're going next, because it connects us to the heart and the creative part of us that I feel already knows exactly where the road is, where the path goes. But to bring it, to ground it a little bit into my own work, I'm going to read from a book that I published a couple of years ago now about summarizing my research up to this point with the plants, including the personal experience that brought about that research. So that now, when I think of my work, I don't really separate anymore what the personal experience of the human being interacting and the scientists doing the science. There's no difference, there's just one. So in this part of my book, I talk about sound and the voice, and voicing or silencing. In the midst of the rich symphony of nature, plants appear utterly silent. Because we are designed to believe our own perceptions, our human experience of their silence is so obvious and undeniable that we forget to question whether plants truly are as voiceless as we perceive them. Admittedly, without offering some proof of plant voice, assuming we agreed on the definition of voice, we might rightly deem the question itself to be nonsense. However, to forget to ask the question, in effect, dismisses any chance for the proof to emerge. As a matter of fact, this is exactly what colonial ideologies of dominion and manipulation have succeeded at. By scorning traditional knowledge as unsubstantiated and fanciful, and erasing our ancestral memories that spoke of other possibilities, humanity has found itself locked up inside the experimental box of a restraining sociocultural view. Like the plants in my experimental boxes, we are besieged by a barrier of emptiness designed to block any possibility of communication. From this viewpoint, of course, plants do not speak. The good news is that by simply asking the question regarding vegetal speech, we are free to move away from the self-righteous slumber we have numbed our mind with. By merely asking the question about plant voice, we set ourselves free from the preconceived notion that construe plants as inevitably voiceless, and we now open ourselves to observing plants as they actually behave and to discovering the reality we share. That's right, because voice is an intersubjective affair. Voice exists in the place of relation, the space between the self and the other, and it is what we bring to our encounters with plants that defines the quality of our communicative rendezvous. Those who we allow to speak and those who we silence. If there is truly a plant voice, how does it speak? How can we hear it? The voice of the vegetal other is revealed in a place of reciprocity. At this point, some would argue that our dialogue with plants lacks reciprocity, as it would seem that for plants to do the talking, we are required merely to be the listeners, never the speakers. This argument will be based on the recognition that dialogue entails a mutual exchange, in which the one who speaks must be also able to hear, and the one who hears is also capable of speaking. Accordingly, it would be concluded that there is no dialogue at all between plants and us, because we are supposed to give them our full attention, but they never engage with and respond to us. Well, in the course of my research, this perception was about to be, if not completely debunked, severely altered by new scientific findings. And I stopped there because basically, again, this summarizes much of my research. It just, and not just mine. I would say that now there are a few labs around the world who are entering this area of scientific investigation. And it is all about the communicability of the plant world. And I'm talking about sound, and I'm talking about voices that we can hear, we can connect with, we can explore in the relationship. And I have been spending more and more time, especially at these times of lockdown. We are still in lockdown here in Australia. I've been spending, I'm very lucky because I live close to a forest, and I can sneak out into the forest and not break too many rules about the lockdown. And I've been actually climbing a tree that is on the land where I live, and I've been listening. And I've been placing microphones under the ground and then sitting on top of the tree and just listening to who comes and visits this tree aside from me. And also, what does the tree have to say? How does he move? How does he relate with what is around in that moment? And what has been very interesting is that there is also a lot of water where I live around in this area. And I've been listening to the creek as well. And then one day recently, as I was playing back those sounds, just to hear them again and see, because I find that there is actually so much that is being shared that one listening session is not enough. So I listen to those recordings multiple times, and I always seem to be able to hear something new that I didn't notice straight away. And the other day, just for fun, I was noticing now the sound of the tree, if it is speeded up, and the sound of the creek, if it's slowed down, actually meet somewhere. And you can't tell the difference between which one is which. And I felt a sense of, I don't know, awe, because of course, and technology was mentioned just before, our technology as a tool to help us recognize our own place and our own, and also the world, how the world actually works, that is all interwoven and intermingled. And even the sounds that seems to differentiate two different bodies, like the tree and the creek, can actually meet somewhere and become just one and the same. And I thought that was really interesting because at least at this time, both in the smaller context of my research, there's been a lot of polarizing conversation. There are those that think that whatever I'm talking about is nonsense, and that's fine. And then there are those who are very, like, I love the science and I want to do it too, which is also fine. And of course, if I extrapolate to the bigger context that we are experiencing globally, this coronavirus situation, at least here in Australia, is creating a lot of polarized, divisive conversations. And what the experience actually that I'm having is that different spaces, we all assume that we are all living in the same time-space continuum, but there is no such a thing. And so I've been trying to slow myself down, and also noticing when I speed myself up, and I've been wondering what that would do to my relationships. Relationship with them really demands a different attention. And I find that this is the key. And to return to Mary Oliver, because I really love her, she wrote a beautiful essay And the essay finishes with attention is the beginning of devotion. And I think we really need to be devoted to life, devoted to this place, devoted to this planet where we are all gonna thrive. And maybe this crisis that we are experiencing at the planetary level is exactly pointing us to that. It's like we are all need to be devoted to this growth, to this change, to this creative endeavor that is really inviting us to, like, come on, you can do it better, you can do different. And which in a way brings me to Resonant Earth as well, because it is the I guess the next place where my work is gonna go. And I have, as an ecologist, initially my career started in the ocean, and I spent a lot of time underwater. And then, you know, my work with the plants brought me into the lab. But the lab is a very artificial space, and it's not really my natural. And Resonant Earth, in a way, this new project uses sound as a tool to the sound that is the real sounds that they are found, like the one that I'm listening to from a tree or a creek. And it uses it as a tool to create, to test whether we can support life through sound. The sound of healthy environments, the sound of things that grow well, the sound of a healthy creek that is bubbling with water, not one that is dry because is in drought and because we have cut all the trees around. And I'm really interested because I realize as well that this kind of work does require technology as a support system, but actually it requires technology to make them potentially technology totally redundant. And this is not utopian. This is just like a different vision. And I don't think technology will ever be redundant. But to have a tool, just like my research, to have a tool that does make a point, that is trying to show something, is trying to do something. And then once that it's done, the tool has finished its job. And I often said that about my research. I often, you know, when I've been asked, oh, so what do you think your research is going to do for the future? And what are you going to do, you know, about this? How are you going to develop it further? And I always say that the best compliment for my research is that it becomes totally redundant. Because what it means is that people actually understood what the research was really about. And it's not about the little finding in the little experiment. It's about understanding the connection and the relational world that we live in. So I am kind of very excited, actually, that we are at this time. It's very stressful, and I know that a lot of people are suffering, but at the same time, these are birthing pains, and there is so much work to do. We have all the tools, and yeah, I am really just happy to offer my scientific expertise, but mostly my creativity, I guess. And the beauty of all of these, I think, for me, is that the plants, which, as I read from my book, we have assumed for a long while now, at least in the Western culture, they are voiceless, they are mindless, they are not even alive, they're not subject, they're not agent of their own life. Well, what the research does is actually showing how silly we have been to even believe that possible. And so from that place, we can just move on. And knowing that we're doing this not alone. Humanity is not alone in doing this. When I go and listen to the trees, or when I go and listen to a creek, like many, many, many humans have done before us, I am inspired, and I receive and get ideas that I wouldn't really get by sitting in a lab or sitting in my office. So these others are contributing already, and we just might not recognize that. But by recognizing that, we actually acknowledge the participation. And I think it makes it much easier. And I think it makes everyone feels that this is not a burden. This is like we're just creating a new world. And how cool is that? So yeah, I think it's very exciting. And I think that science, the face of science will have to change. And as someone said before, like in service of the arts rather than the other way around, which has been a little bit the case, for at least for what I understand and I have experienced. So I'm looking forward to be of service to that. And I guess I'll finish here. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Monica. Fantastic. I'm sure we have people want some questions now or have some issues they want to talk about. I mean, being of service, poetic language, beauty, fantasy, sense of awe, devoted to life. Does anybody want to reply to what Monica has been telling us? Or also the audience. So I know we have people here in the audience who are working on this topic from an artistic, but also from a botanical perspective.
Just a quick point. Monica, thank you very much also. What is key is the modern human attitude, you know. We still have this very human-centered attitude. People are talking about Industry 5.0 with a human-centered approach to artificial intelligence, but that's not enough. It has to be a bio-centered approach, including plants, for sure. And we really have to move from that human-centered approach to a modern human approach in everything we do, and thinking about the interrelationship between all species. And you can come into, of course, the discussion, is artificial intelligence also a species, a human-created species? Probably yes, sooner or later. But certainly the species on our Earth that we have here are key. And I think that it's also in our own interest. It's not something only we are doing for the world to be good. It's in our own self-interest to adopt this modern human attitude. I really wanted to stress that.
Okay.
We have a question from the audience.
Yeah. Do I have a feedback now? It's working. Monica Gagliano, thank you so much for these great words. And I had this image seeing you sitting in the trees and by the river and sensing the world. I have one dry question. How do you finance your life as a feeling a human being? I ask you that because I think a lifestyle like that you described is a kind of a dream. I mean, I think for many, many people. And I know a lot of people who would like to do that, what you are doing, to be connected and to be in a good way passive. But I think to realize this future, it is tremendous important to understand for many, many people, how can I make my living? I think this is an essential question, and I would like to get some ideas from you. How do you realize that economically? Thank you.
Yeah. It's a very important question, and I ask that myself every day. And I think it requires a totally different approach to life. So the work is not something that you do, but it's just you're living life, and in living life, there is an exchange, and sometimes it's also monetary or whatever exchange, and I think, as it was also mentioned before, we will need to rethink what work means, and in a way, I find I'm a workaholic. I confess, and I do a lot, and so it's actually become like when you are actually doing what it is that you have come to do. not what society says that you should be doing so that you can pay your mortgage and all of the things that apparently you need and you should be having to be successful and to be, you know, I don't know, somewhere. Then when you do that, life has very strange and magical ways of supporting, and financially as well, because we are not lacking resources of that kind. It's just that they're not distributed well. So it's a matter of redistributing what we have as humanity as well, so that this world is so rich that there should be no one starving. And yet we do. We still have plenty of people here. The crisis with coronavirus highlighted on the street, and many of them were women from around 50 with no kids. That was the kind of the group that got affected the most. And I think that is what we need to look at, rather what kind of work am I going to do? Because when we see where the issues are, then we become very creative, and then you're actually expressing, and in a way you are creating the place and the space where you're most useful, not because society says so, but because you love doing that. And if that could be like helping those women that are on the street now, or helping whatever it is that works for you, I think that, life has really incredible way to support that. And I say this not as a naive and like, so the world is all so good, but I was unemployed. I found myself unemployed for almost 3 years, a couple of years ago. After doing all this apparently amazing work in science, there was no job for me. I applied for a few jobs. I applied for jobs that I was overqualified to, and still nothing. And because life had another plan. And it took me 2 years to realize and understand how it worked, and to really learn how to trust deeply that what I was asked to do is to discover who I was as the human in this time, in this world, and be that. And it, of course, it's still work in progress. It's always going to be work in progress. But what it means is the more I work in that progress, the more I have time to do exactly what I've come to do. And if what I've come to do is to sit on a tree, literally, and listen, then this is what I do. And I get paid for it, because this is what I've come to do. And then actually I think you find that you don't become passive at all. You become more active than ever before, because you are grateful that you're being given the opportunity to actually be you. And I think that this is the kind of change that our world really needs. And again, coronavirus has forced people to stop working as we knew it. And I think that many have realized that actually they were spending way too much time doing something that they didn't really care that much about. And life had other things, and they're still okay. It's not that they're starving, because they changed their work routines and they're working less, so they're working differently. So it's a very important question, because I think that we are going to have to address it together as a collective, and also take responsibility for where we put our precious time, because time runs out. So what you do with it, it's important.
Thank you, Monica. I would like to, since you are here, I would like to take the opportunity to ask you this, because I think you have a very unique perspective as a scientist, and also as a person that has developed this very, very deep, loving relationship with plants. And it goes in the direction of a consensus, and eventually the notion of euphemistic language, and this idea of how is it possible to detach ourselves from this anthropocentric view? And the idea of, like this idea of like speaking for, or like how we speak in the name of those who don't speak our language, or eventually they are voiceless. So And I have read your book, and I have this, and through your experience with plantas sagradas or like ancient rituals, they have a way to use this kind of euphemistic language in a way of what we would consider euphemistic language, but it has a completely different approach, since it's based on this very deep connection, and also based on love. And the loving relationship that you develop through the plant. So what would be for you, from this unique perspective, like what would be a way to separate or be able to speak for, or what, how you call it, like maybe like this idea of like the plant talks through me rather than I'm speaking for, or I'm taking this, power position over it. How could you, because how could you explain to somebody that didn't go through this experience with plantas sagradas eventually? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, again, the role of technology as in the arts in general, but the use of technology can be very supportive here, because basically since ever, even in ancient time, we used caves because they resonated sound and they made it louder. We always created technological systems, whether they are made of clay, whether they are made of high-tech electronics these days, but to amplify sound, to reverberate it, to make it louder, we have always tried to extend our own senses and our own perception, or the ability that we have to perceive, with the use of, these extensions, so that we could feel and see and hear and taste and perceive more. And so I think that technology in this sense plays a really important role, because it allows us to hear something that we have given for granted. It was not even speaking, had nothing to say because he had no voice. And instead now we know that they do. But time ago, we probably thought that dogs also couldn't really hear properly, or they had a strange way of behaving when there was no sound. And now we know, obviously, that they hear different frequencies and that we can't hear. And then through technology, now we can appreciate what those frequencies are. So from that perspective, I think technology can play an important role. The risk, which is pointing at what you are saying, if I understand correctly, the risk is to then take technology or any other similar strategy and put it on top of the voice or whoever is speaking, instead of allowing them to speak for themselves. I've seen this with the sound of plants, where plants have been, people have produced the music of plants, and plants don't produce music. We produce music. If we are thinking of music as, a particular way of putting notes together that sounds pleasing to us, and it's got particular rhythm and all of that, something that we recognize as being musical. Plants have sound, they produce sound, and they don't need to be translated. They don't need to be, transformed into some other thing that we recognize as, this now is appropriate to us. Because that is exactly the trap of the anthropocentric version of our relationship with them. It's like, we talk about plants, but we'll overlay our own version of what plants should be sounding like, instead of just having the patience to listen to what they are. And I think that the world, not just plants, but the world is asking us to allow it to be what it is instead of what it should be, including ourselves, which goes back to the question from before. Now, I guess the relationship or the experience that I had, and I was very lucky and continue to be very lucky to have in relation to experiencing plants in ceremonial context, those are kind of like fast tracks, because they allow for this very embodied experience of what it means to encounter this non-human other. And for those, and I know there are many, for those who have had those experiences, the experience is very clear. And there is actually no doubt that there is another there. And so then the problem is not so much that we're still trying to explain it as in the constraint of human parameters, but we do only have our human language to literally converse about this. So acknowledging that that's what we have, that's the technology that we're using for this purpose, then that's how we speak of it. But then we have to be very careful how we use this technology, language. And I guess, again, it calls for attention to how we speak for, on behalf of others. They have their own voice. We just need to listen. And maybe we'll speak a bit less. And that might actually be very useful to the world too. Because when we are more silent and we listen more, I think we are naturally much more at peace anyway.
Thank you, Monica. That was a really nice plaidoyer to listen more to nature, listen more to plants. And we would love to talk longer with you, but we have to move on. And it was a real pleasure to have you come in here from Australia. And if you have time, please listen. I know it's already very late on your side of the world, but if you have time, please listen to the next lectures. We have really awesome presentations coming up by Dr. Martin Vosser and by Gabriele Winkler. So please stay online, and if you have to go sleep, then good night, and really thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the first part of this session is over. I would now like a small switch and have Dr. Martin Vosser and Gabriele Winkler come on stage. And maybe we can switch back to the cable from before, back to the presentation mode. I don't know, who was it? How do we do this? Thanks, Juan, for helping. And we will have afterwards a live demo of learning a lot about plants. So I think this is a very nice hands-on part of the program. So let me just put this slide up here, and I will also hand over now to Fabricio, who is moderating this part of the session. So welcome to Dr. Martin Vosser, head of the Biologiezentrum O.Ö Landeskultur G.m.B.H, and he will talk about plants, botanical collections, and their implication on culture and art. So we are slowly moving into the art direction. And Mr. Vosser, I have here your slides. So you can either just play them here, or I don't know if this is working. Yes, this is also working. So I will also move here.
I would like to introduce Martin Vosser. He is a PhD in genetics and botany. He publishes on plant systematics and molecular evolution of plants and conceives and designs exhibitions on botany and the domestication of plants. And he is also the head of the botanical collection at the Biologiezentrum. And we have been collaborating with Martin because a lot of our students from interface cultures, they come to him when they need to be when we need to be consulted on how they could build their systems together with plants, and he's always very kind and very open to attend or very weird questions sometimes. So thank you very much, Martin, for being here. The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe it's also weird what I'm now talking about art, so it's a kind of interaction between artists and botanists. But thank you very much for inviting me here, and that I may share a few ideas of a botanist. And maybe first I should a little bit introduce what our botanical collections really is. you see on this slide, so we have a kind of archival system, and this is filled with a lot of dried, preserved specimens of plants. But not only plants, we also have a huge collection of unicellular algae, which are mounted on microscopic slides, and different special collections about various aspects of botanical life worldwide. And we are one of the larger herbaria, one of the larger botanical collections in Europe. But not only we have these physical specimens, with each of these specimens there's also connected a lot of data. And if you wish, you could say that behind these doors of this archival system, this is a huge collection of data, and what our aim is that we want to exploit this data in various aspects. So we have projects where we are addressing up-to-date topics like climate change, biodiversity, and many, many more. Talking about art is rather the exception, but nevertheless, I'm happy if I can draw you now on a small journey about what a botanist could say about art in his own ideas. Now, even botanists sometimes come to a museum, and a few years ago I came across this building. I found it in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and somehow it attracted my attention, and I looked at it more closely, and it's clear to everybody that this is kind of this genre of still life paintings, which was very famous in the golden age of Netherlands paintings. Now, if I would ask you what's your opinion on this painting, on this picture, probably all of you would say this is a beautiful painting. The term beauty was already coined today by Christoph, and especially if you look at flowers, it's a kind of a kind of normality if you regard flowers as something beautiful. It's even so that in psychiatric testings, people, pictures of flowers are presented to patients, and if they tell this is a kind of beautiful picture, it's a kind of proof of a healthy mind. Why is this so? And so at first sight, we would say, or most of us would say, this is a beautiful picture. But what this leads us to the question, what is beauty indeed? So it's a kind of a philosophical question. And a few years ago, we had an exhibition here in Linz in the museum, and there I found this statement about still life paintings. And here in this statement, it's stated that there's probably nothing more suited to an objective reproduction of reality than the object itself. So this implies that if we look at a still life, we see something of reality. If we now look at this picture, it looks like a real arrangement of flowers. So if we look at it in very detail, we see that every smallest detail is painted very accurately. But what's it's puzzling for a botanist is that you can identify each of these flowers, and a botanist can identify all these species which are combined here in this arrangement. And this is one thing which a botanist already puzzles at the first time, because you find flowers which are flowering in early spring together with flowers which are only flowering in summer, or even there are some flowers which only are flowering in autumn. So our impression then, the botanist's impression is that this cannot be a real reproduction of a real arrangement. So it's this what we regard as being a beautiful painting is in reality a kind of imagination of the painter, or even more an illusion. So is beauty an illusion? Is it something real, or is it something what only the human mind has invented? There's another thing which also puzzled me. So the most dominant plants in this arrangement are the tulip flowers. There are quite a lot of different tulip flowers. And if you look closer at these tulip flowers, you find one flower with yellow and red petals. And then there are several, and the majority of the tulip flowers have these prominent white flowers with the red markings. And as a botanist, and having in mind that Hans Boulanger, who painted this arrangement of flowers, lived in the early 17th century, it is clear to a botanist, and this is also the information you get from all this data we have in our collections, that this tulip flower represents the most famous tulip flower of that time. So it's the so-called variety Semper Augustus, which is depicted here again. And this flower created what got to be the first financial crisis, the first global financial crisis in the beginning of the 17th century. It's now called this kind of tulip mania time, when plant enthusiasts paid huge amounts of money for a single bulb of this special variety. So this Semper Augustus variety was the most highly prized variety at that time, and people put a lot of money into getting a single bulb of this high-priced variety. So you have to imagine that a single bulb costed at that time the equivalent to a decent canal house in Amsterdam. And moreover, people invested money in breeding programs where some tulip breeders wanted to breed even better varieties. And the most expensive varieties have been those varieties with so-called broken color flowers. Broken color flowers means that you have one ground flower and a second, one ground color, and a second color makes these elegant stripes in this ground color. And so the most highly prized was the white base color together with the carmine red markings in these tulip flowers. Now we know that this pattern is created by a virus infection. So there was no possibility to control the occurrence of such highly prized flowers. And as a result, this investment of people who wanted to make a fortune out of breeding finally went down, and in later times you see that the prices suddenly fell to almost nothing. And people lost all their money, and there was a big crisis. And if we go back to this picture of Boulanger about this arrangement of flowers, you see that there are in total 12 of these highly prized Semper Augustus flowers found in this arrangement. And at no time at this tulip mania, there have been more than a dozen bulbs from this flower available. This means in this arrangement of flowers, all of the highly prized tulips have been contained in this arrangement. So a huge amount of money, and probably the artist would not even have had enough money to produce this flower arrangement. Anyway, what does it tell to a botanist? So in the first place, it could not have been a real template for his painting because flowers are from different flowering times, and they never could be arranged together in one flower arrangement. And the second is, what does he want to tell us with these 12 Semper Augustus flowers? I would assume that he also wanted to tell us that beauty is not only an imagination or an illusion, but it may be also something which is very volatile and can change very much. So in one moment, this is very expensive and high priced. In the next moment, it can mean nothing at all. So these are just ideas of a botanist when he looks at this kind of flower arrangement. A second example is also again from a few hundred years ago. So this Botticelli picture of Madonna with child, you also see in the background these white flowers. And these white flowers very often occur in religious paintings. And they resemble the so-called white lily, or also it's called Madonna lily. And so why is it always, is it so often found in religious paintings? Because it's a symbol for purity and chastity, virtue, and therefore it's very often together with Mary. And it's a symbol, just a symbol of chastity and purity. If you look as a botanist at this flower, it's very prominent that you have these 6 white tepals arranged in 2 circles. So you have 3 inner white tepals and 3 outer white tepals. And very prominent in this flower are the bright yellow anthers, which are the male sexual organs, and a single pistil. If you look at the paintings, at the Renaissance paintings, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but if you look closely at the flowers, you can also see that it's a very accurate reproduction of the living plant. So you have these 6 petals, white petals, arranged in 2 circles, and you also see these prominent anthers, yellow anthers. So if you look at paintings which have been painted later. So for example, here you see Christ with the white lily. And this is a picture of Ernst Deger, who belongs to the Düsseldorf School of Painting. And as a botanist, I was puzzled by the fact that these flowers of this Madonna lily look different than those which I know from nature. So what has happened here? So you still see these 3 inner tepals, the 3 outer tepals, but all the sexual organs are missing from this flower. What has happened here? Now, in the 18th century, and these are paintings which you will find at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, where you do not see any sexual organs in these white flowers. So in the 18th century, a famous biologist, Linnaeus, published his Systema Naturae. And in this book, he wanted to classify all the living species known until that date. And for the plant species, he developed a nomenclature system, which was his so-called sexual system, which is based on the sexual organs of the flowers. So you look at the sexual organs of the flowers, you count them, you count how many male organs are there, how many female organs are there, and then you can classify all plants into certain classes. The problem was that his explanations of this classification, for this explanation, he used a very anthropomorphic language. So he said the flower, he mentioned, as you see here in the English translation of the original Latin text, he explained this as the marriages of plants. And he regarded the flower itself as the bed, and the male flower organs, he mentioned them to be the husbands, and the female organs are the wives. And if you look at the Madonna lily, so this Madonna lily belongs to the class Hexandria monogynia, which means that there are 6 male organs and 1 female organ. And in his explanation, 6 husbands are together with 1 wife in the marriage bed. And you can imagine this plant for the Catholic Church should be a symbol of chastity, and it was clear that this was not acceptable to the Catholic Church. And as a consequence, Pope Clement XIII put the books of Carl of Linné on the list on the index of prohibited books. And as a consequence, after this book was prohibited, it was no longer allowed for painters to paint this Madonna lily together with the sexual organs. So during a short period, end of 18th until beginning of 19th century, you find a lot of religious paintings where you do not see any sexual organ in the white lilies. Yes, as a last example, this is now not an example from a painting, but this should demonstrate that knowledge about plants also has an influence on literature. And a few years ago, it was the 400th anniversary of William Shakespeare. And if you look at his plays and poems, you very often find mentions of plants. So more than 120 plants are mentioned in his plays. And I think most of these plants, if not all of these plants, have a certain meaning, and it is somehow necessary to fully understand what Shakespeare meant with his plays, that you also know information about the plants which occur there. Now, one of the first German translators of Shakespeare's texts was Christoph Martin Wieland in the 18th century. And it's funny to read his manuscripts when he translated these Shakespeare plays. And if you just look at the last notation which he made during his translations, which means this disgusting obscenity of the scenes does not allow to translate them. So what is this disgusting obscenity of the scenes? And if you look, I just want to bring one example from one of the most famous tragedies, Romeo and Juliet. And there is a scene where Mercutius, the colleague of Romeo, says, "Now will he sit under a medlar tree," so he talks about Romeo, "and wish his mistress were that kind of fruit as maids call medlars when they laugh alone. O Romeo, that she wear, an open arse and thou a poprin pear." So, does it mean anything to us? First of all, we should know what is a medlar tree, because he's comparing his friend with a medlar tree, or with the fruits of a medlar tree, and the poprin pear. So some plants which occur in these few lines. So I show you the medlar tree, or the fruits of the medlar tree. They grow in Europe. Also, they are not very widely known nowadays, but some 20, 30, 50 years ago, maybe in each garden of a farmer, you could find a tree, and these fruits can be eaten. Now, medlar tree, the fruits of a medlar tree have some sexual connotation, at least in the Victorian ages. But if you look at dialect expressions, even Upper Austrian dialect expressions for these fruits, then they are called, for example, Hundsersch, meaning, if you translate them, it's the asses of dogs. So also some sexual connotation. And in this play, Mercutio says that somehow these fruits resemble the female sexual organs, and Romeo is thinking about these fruits, indirectly about female sexual organs, and it continues with the poprin pear. So Popperin is nowadays a city in Belgium, and in the Victorian times there was a famous pear variety which was also grown in England, and this pear variety had a very long neck, somehow similar like this pear. And this is also now, again, a sexual connotation about the male sexual organs. And moreover, it's a kind of word joke which Shakespeare also makes in this respect. Popperin sounds similar like pop her in, put it in. And I leave it to your imagination what Shakespeare might have meant with this. So these have been just 3 examples where a botanist maybe has also some ideas how to interpret certain kind of artwork or implications when information, knowledge about plants also is used in artworks, in art pieces. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Martin, for these 3 examples. And we are running a little bit late in time, so we are going to keep the questions for after. And now I would like to introduce Gabriele Winkler, alias Flora Fabulosa, who graduated in cultural anthropology at the University of Vienna. She has spent several months at the tropical rainforest of the Amazon basin. Thank you, Christa. And today she works as an ethnobotanist and permaculturist in Upper Austria, where she passes on her knowledge about the wild greens at various educational institutes, schools, kindergartens, as well as private groups. And we know her from the workshop that she's hosting at the Innenhof. And thank you, Gabriele, for your workshops, where I've also participated, and for teaching us how to look around and find the beauty around in every corner.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Gabriele Winkler, alias Flora Fabulosa, as you can see. As a cultural anthropologist with a focus on ethnobotany, I'll talk about botanical outsiders today. They are called neophytes. I'm pretty sure you heard about them. And they are perfectly reflecting some decisive aspects of climate care, mainly consumer behavior and global trade. So watch out within the next few minutes, I will present you 3 really bad plants. Bad plants, you may ask. Well, they are alien here to Europe. They act pretty aggressively, and we simply lost control over them. Huh? Invasive neophytes are plants that were introduced to Europe after 1492, when Columbus arrived to America, and are now spreading alarmingly fast. That has, of course, an impact on native flora. But let's go into practice. And let's start with one of my favorite bad boys. It's the staghorn sumac. Maybe you want to pass it around in the audience so that everybody can take a closer look. This plant is called staghorn sumac. If you want to know why it's called like this, just touch the velvety brown bark of the younger branches. It reminds on young deer antler. This beauty once traveled all the way from the US East Coast to Europe, originally to bring a touch of Indian summer to the upper-class pleasure gardens of the 17th century. The vinegar tree, as we call it in German, remained very popular for centuries, although it didn't stay where it was supposed to. The plant spreads by underground runners, as you can see very clearly here, over which the gardener very easily loses control, like we know it all from bamboo. Furthermore, birds like to eat the red fruit and help so to spread the American sumac all over Europe, where the tree is very competitive among European plants, native plants. Well, if we would ask a Native American, he or she would tell you a different story about this plant. Among many indigenous groups of the US East Coast, the staghorn sumac holds a very high status in folk medicine, nutrition, and in cultural tradition. Let's talk about the culinary aspects. The red cones, as you can see them clearly, are very rich in vitamin C and therefore a perfect stock or a travel provision. Nowadays, US kids still love to drink pink lemonade. That is a sour, fizzy, cold water extract of the red fruits. If you want to try the recipe, and I can highly recommend to do so, just put the red hairy fruits and put it into water for a few hours. After that, drain it through a dish towel to get rid of the tiny little hairs that may cause a scratchy throat, and enjoy. So that's a very simple recipe, and you can, if you want, taste the lemonade afterwards because I prepared some bottles for you. It's pretty sour, the lemonade I mean, so if you want you may a little bit add sugar or honey. Finally, if you want to go a step further in experimenting with the staghorn sumac, you can also use the colorful autumn leaves. Well, it's not that colorful right now, but it's starting right now to get colorful. So you can use the colorful autumn leaves like the Cheyenne native people do in North America. They call the staghorn sumac "smoke is rising." Why? Because the leaves are, among other herbs, part of their famous kinnikinnick smoke mixture that goes directly into the freedom pipe. I did taste a smoke mixture of different herbs and the autumn leaves of sumac, but it didn't turn out very nice, to be honest. But you know, let's give it a try. Okay, we'll continue our little outcast trinity, as I call it, with a small but very powerful pioneer named kiwweed or quickweed. In Germany and Austria, better known as French weed. Once you see it, I'm pretty sure you know it because it grows everywhere. Just pass it around perhaps at the audience as well. Well, the different names speak for themselves. So let's take a closer look at that. Quickweed refers to its rapid reproduction. Every plant produces up to 100,000 seeds, which are light, they are carried by wind, and they are floatable on water. Within 6 weeks, a new generation is ready for reproduction. Pretty impressive, don't you think? The folk name kiwweed tells us about the travel route of the plant. Like many other neophytes, the plant went over the hedge. In this case, it was the famous hedge of Kew Gardens in Britain. In Germany, people watched the new weed spreading like mad in their fields, and that was just at the same time when Napoleon's troops brought fear and loathing. So they blamed the French to introduce the weed, French weed. The travel route went further east, so in Poland, people call it German wheat, and in Russia, they call it Polish wheat. Huh? But where does this little cosmopolitan originally comes from? Well, it's a Latino. In Central and South America, it grows as a typical wheat, often in potato or maize fields. And I spent a lot of time in Latin America, studying, traveling, and I was enjoying, of course, a typical rustic chicken soup in Colombia named ajiaco. It took me quite a long time searching for the tasteful umami-like flavor in this dish until I realized that a major ingredient of the soup is quickweed. I highly recommend to use the weed in your kitchen because it fits perfectly with potatoes, like it does out in the field as well. And it fits as well perfectly as a green in any kind of soup, chilies or curries. The best taste can be achieved by harvesting the plant before it begins to bloom. At this stage, the structure is softer and the aroma is milder. And by the way, French weed, this little plant, bears one of the highest levels of ferrum in European edible flora, as well as a high level on other trace elements and vitamins. Plus, it lowers blood pressure. So, if you are looking for an exclusive superfood from Latin America, pick French wheat. It's for free and it literally grows by your doorstep everywhere. So when it comes to neophytes, we got the third one, and it's a really, really bad one. Thanks a lot. I'm pretty sure you all know it. Don't let yourself be fooled by the beautiful flowers or the very nice and lovely folk names for the plant. It's called Himalayan balsam, or jumping jack, or poor man's orchid. Huh? In German, we simply call it Springkraut, which refers to the green seed heads that will pop at the slightest brush. Well, this is not ripe, but the other ones perhaps are. We're building a new population in here. They pop at the slightest brush and they dash away their seeds up to 7 meters. That means in a pure stand of balsam, you will find up to 32,000 seeds per square meter. Oh? Imagine the poor botanist counting them. Well, it was in 1839 when plant collector G.F. Royal brought it from Kashmir to England along with other exotic plants. Soon it fled, or let's say it jumped out of the botanical collections into UK freedom and spread alongside British rivers and creeks. And more or less 100 years later, a medical doctor called Eduard Bach sat down at one of those creeks, and he was so inspired by the beautiful plant that he found one of his first essences of the famous Bach flower therapy. He called it impatiens, like the Latin scientific name of the poor man's orchid, impatiens. Today, British school kids are often seen on environmentalist excursions called balsam bashing, yeah? Trying to get rid of the invasive neophyte, which is supposed to displace native flora. Such well-meaning action doesn't impress the jumping jack a lot. Wherever the plant is knocked down, immediately it built out new adventive roots to get up again, as you can see here. Well, it is also interesting to take a short look at the balsam's little brother from Siberia. Likewise, it fled from the botanical gardens in Geneva and Dresden in the 19th century and went wild. The Nazis didn't like the plant at all. So they sent out Hitler Youth troops to fight against this Mongolian weed and to combat the Bolshevization of native flora by uprooting it. Once more, we're gonna take a look at the origins of the poor man's orchid to find more about the benefits of this aggressive beauty. In India, the fresh flowers are used medically to treat fungal infections of the skin, as well as the traditional Chinese medicine do. The name balsam refers to the balsamic effects on itchy skin, caused, for example, by stinging nettle or by mosquito bites. In such a case, just squeeze the fresh plant and apply the sap to the part of the skin where you need it. Even the jumping seeds can be harvested as little by-the-way snacks on walks. They are very tasty with a fine nutty aroma and of course a lot of fun to harvest, as you can imagine. The case of Himalayan balsam shows us very clearly the perception of alien plants in Europe. Once they were introduced on purpose, but didn't stay where we wanted them, and filled every little gap they could find to grow in their new environment. Describing the character of neophytes, we use vocabulary usually known from war and terrorism, such as invasion, aggression, campaign of conquest, and so on. But plants only want to grow. They are not bad on purpose. If we take an intelligent look at the problem, we'll see that these plants and the alarming speed that they are distributing, well, it tells us a lot about how we, as Europeans, treat our nature and our soil. We love to fertilize, we love to dig, we love to build, and we love to seal environmentally valuable areas. So only the strongest and most innovative plants can deal with that kind of change in nature. Neophytes should therefore be seen as an expression of disturbed natural landscapes. And I think I don't have to make no words about my conclusions. We live in a globalized world. Every day we have the possibility to choose between chia seeds from Ecuador or between fresh French wheat from the garden, between acerola berries from the Amazon or self-made lemonade, as we will try later on. That's the one thing. The other thing, for me, there is no better way to get in contact with nature and plants than to literally incorporate them, eating them, drinking them, even smoking them, as you like. Well, I invite everyone not to ignore even the so-called bad, uninvited members of European flora. And the last words, for me, they are very simple but very true. We can only respect and protect what we know. So thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele, for your talk. If there is no rushing question, we will continue and leave the questions for the session later, for the Q&A, and for later we will have a final discussion, and hopefully we will have the chance finally to try your drinks. So I would like to move on, and now it's my turn to give you all an introduction about my work as an artist and my research as a PhD candidate here at the Kunstuniversität. And my topic is interspecies collaboration, but within the framework of the arts and artistic research. And of course, like one of my very, like the key of my work and why I'm doing and why it's so interesting for me is to try to find ethical agendas within the arts and compared to other disciplines like scientific disciplines eventually. And one of these key elements is this notion of other man's minds. So I would like to continue by saying that the problem of other minds is a very ancient problem that is still present in contemporary society. And it is so because we haven't been given the tools to construct our cultural beliefs, allowing us to understand other species. Today we are not missing the observation skills and tools, nor moments of interaction with other species. In fact, we are all exposed to meaningful moments of exchange with other species all the time. What we are missing are the cultural constructs that make all these observations and experiences cohesive. According to Donna Haraway, this discrepancy between our singular ways of experiencing and understanding the world and what we are taught to believe can lead us to confusion and to frustration. So when we extrapolate this argument to the use of animals in laboratory research, here we are confronted again with this paradoxical contradiction. On the one hand, research on animals is considered ethical for the physiological and cognitive differences that separate us. We have been taught that those species experience the world in a different way that we do, and therefore they don't experience pain and anxiety the same way as we do. On the other hand, research on animals is legitimated precisely because of the similar features that we share. So acknowledging these similarities could provide the grounds to explore those other potentially profound differences that exist in the ways we experience the world. Or, in Wittgenstein's words, if a lion could talk, we probably couldn't understand him. And concluding with Lisa Jebrat's words, and precisely because we can't understand, it is important to listen. Experimentation is only permitted where the person without capacity stands to benefit directly from the process. Animals, of course, cannot give consent, as we've been talking before. So in a therapeutic setting, they rely on their owners or competent institutions in charge of their welfare to give consent for them. As with patients lacking capacity, the consent of the animal is presumed if the treatment is in its best interests. The anthropologist Elmer Veldkamp emphasizes then this idea of euphemistic language used by research institutions that justify the use of animals as valued commodities. In a created context of sacrifice and common good, using expressions such as laboratory animals who gave us valuable insights or animals who offered up their valuable lives. George Orwell states that political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. Indeed, since the only way for us to make sense of unseen reality is to have it translated into words, language can become a mind control tool to shape desired beliefs, visions, and values. Haig Bos-Magin, professor of speech communication, in his book The Language of Oppression, shows that throughout human history, the rhetorical wordplay of anti-Semitism, racism, Native American mockery, and sexism was employed to dehumanize human beings and justify their suppression and even their extermination. Words or phrases that are repeatedly promoted by the media, scholars, and politicians slowly slip into our subconscious and slowly become part of our daily vocabulary. We no longer question their meaning, they become an alienable part of us, shaping our visions of the surrounding world and the way we interact with it. But what happened to those whose voices we can't understand or even hear? Years of education, formal or informal, have shaped our views and beliefs about the natural world. Words like crop, harvest, stock, cull, yield, surplus are commonly used in biological sciences and by governmental institutions. But then why such language has not become obsolete despite all that we know about the animal world? Why does it persist? Franz de Waal states, when our ancestors moved from hunting to farming, they lost respect for animals and began to look at themselves as the rulers of nature. In order to justify how they treated our other species, they had to play down their intelligence and deny them a soul. Hannah Arendt suggests that groups supporting universal human rights show an uncanny similarity in language and composition to that of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals. The problem is not that they are deprived of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but that they don't belong to our same community. Since the Romantics, we are trying to set up a distinction between the cultural and the natural world, perceiving the first as corrupted and the second one as pure. And we want it that way. We wanted the cultural world to be organized and purposeful, and we want the natural world to be wild, somewhere we can get lost, a counterpoint to the culturally constructed world, a place that we can take by violence and corrupt at our own will, and for that we need to take distance from it. Today we know that this is not as such. We know that both worlds, cultural and natural, belong to the same world. We know that both worlds are full of politics, culture, meaning, interaction, communication, and intention. Unifying both worlds into one world of meaning could be a solution for shifting our anthropocentric cultural view of the world. My question then would be, could contemporary art, as an already alternative capital, take on this challenge and propose new cartographies of subjectivity from which new values could be affirmed? The experimental nature of contemporary practice-based research, not supporting the observer or observed subject distinction, make of the subject, the object, and the observation main theoretical keywords. The problem of living with, speaking for, recognizing others, has remained a central concern for many disciplines and activist communities. Disability studies, queer theories, ecofeminism, and animal studies, among others, have written on the many ways that the other is speaking for. But while these disciplines have historically succeeded in the ethics of representation, they have failed to extend their arguments towards the practical implications of such ethical argument. Kate Soper, in her book What's Nature, addressed both classical approaches to nature. On the one hand, the ecological concerns coinciding with the birth of animal rights movements, and on the other, the theoretical emphasis on postmodernist thinking, concerned with the debate around the mediation of culture in relations to the non-human world. Animal endorsing endorses animal life itself, and therefore it aligns with the work of conservationists and animal advocacy rather than with its cultural constructions. Animal skeptical, on the contrary, is likely to be skeptical for the animals themselves, using and reinterpreting old-fashioned modernist scientific methodologies of classifying the animal in order to make it meaningful to the human. This term of animal skeptical is the process of artists like Joseph Beuys or Marc Dion, as you can see in the slides, whose common subject in their work, besides their ecological and environmental concerns, was not the animal itself, but rather the many attempts of science and philosophy to create secure hierarchies and taxonomies in which to place it. Interspecies art projects most of the time provoke a visceral reaction on their audiences. Sometimes they make them laugh, other times provoke their rage. Whatever the case, due to the complexity and responsibility that working with other species arises, interspecies art projects always visualize on pertinent and serious issues. By conceptualizing collaborations with other species, as well as confronting with their results, we, humans, are forced to question our self-proclaimed center position. A position that we believe has led us to immense ecological destruction and the suffering and the extinction of many species. Introducing collaboration as a term in our interaction with other living forms forces us to acknowledge their agency, turning them into our intellectual and spiritual partners, and therefore becoming much more difficult to put them through suffering or danger. Thank you. Okay, so now I would like to maybe open briefly to Q&A. So if anyone has a comment that would like to do from our host, or if there is any question around, please raise your hand and we will pass you the microphone. Any question? Christa? Should we have a short little break and then we continue immediately?
Thank you. Maybe I missed it, but did you talk about ragweed? This is the worst, right? No, exactly. That's my question. Thank you.
Sorry. I didn't talk about ragweed because the problem is that when I talk about plants, I always want to have the living example in my hand. And I didn't want to take the risk to bring ragweed right here and to spread it right here. Because in the question of neophytes, for me, ragweed is the one that is still worth to control. There are other plants, as we saw in my explanations, where we simply lost control and where there is no matter now and where there is no sense of combating it because they have already won. So ragweed is a big problem, and actually I'm glad that I didn't found it on my way from Evering to Linz. And actually, I'm glad that I didn't found it here in the city. For everybody that does not know what ragweed is a little plant and it's not really special, but it causes very heavy allergical reactions. And that's a very big problem in Middle Europe. So the thing is, I'm absolutely, pro neophytes, and I like the idea that the plants does want to show us something if it grows in a certain place. But when it comes to ragweed, the things are slightly different. But that's another discussion. Thank you.
I know that some of you have been demanding a break, but if there is now questions for Fabricio or for Mr. Foster or for Gabriele, we are ready. Otherwise, we could also plan in a very short break, 5 minutes break, to freshen up and come back in a few minutes. And we will have afterwards all the speakers on stage to have a general discussion for everybody. So I think, Gerhard, you wanted to have a small break now?
It's just an idea for everybody.
For everybody, okay. Okay, short break now. 5 minutes break, please. We will have herbal drinks made by Gabriele Winkler afterwards, and she will also serve those drinks here, so in 20 minutes from now. And please come up here if you would like to taste some of these drinks. And I think Gabriele will also explain what they are. They're really very special.
Okay, so we have, first of all, the staghorn sumac lemonade. It's pink lemonade called. Well, it's not really pink, it's more orangey, but it's very, very sour. So if you want a real fresh, sour, fizzy kick, you can try this one. And yeah,
please come.
So please. If it's too sour, you have to put water to it. But try it. No, this is not fermented. You can open it normally. And on the other hand, I have some naturally fermented sodas. And I can't use the microphone when I'm serving it because I have to pop it like controlled. Because fermenting lemonades are not so easy to control. Once the process is starting, you never know when the time comes when you pop it. It pops like champagne. We will see what happened now. This is black currant, mahonia, and wild mint, so we have a neophyte in it as well. Most people don't think that mahonia fruits are edible, but they are. So I have different lemonades. One is with pear, lemon balm. I have black currant. I have plum with wild pepper. So if you want to give it a try, come over. Thanks. This is the staghorn sumac lemonade, the pink lemonade. The staghorn sumac you held in your hands. That was the red cones with the little berry-like fruits with the fine hairs. Huh?
We have still 2 more small presentations, and yes, maybe our speakers can come up here for. Yeah, and I still have a short presentation for you prepared, but in the meantime, I think we have to. Do we all fit? We might have to borrow one more chair.
You want to sit here?
Okay, so we have 2 more presentations here. Please also come up, Mr. Fossa and Gabriele. I think we have, do we all fit hier? Chris, dürfen wir uns deinen schönen Sessel kurz ausborgen? Entschuldigung, aber ich will dich da nicht. Ich weiß, der ist voll bequem, gell? Ja, ja. So I hope you are refreshed and have a few more minutes concentration. So I think we talked about so many topics, and of course this whole idea of sustainability and what the artists can do is so complex that we cannot handle this in this one session, and there will be more Leonardo laser talks in the future, and we want to address these issues in the coming sessions. So let me just very briefly go through, from my point of view, what we can do as artists. Well, how some artists, and we already had a very beautiful presentation from art history before, so there's a bit of an overlap here. Seeing plants through art is my topic, and I would like to go back to something that Monica Gagliano somehow briefly mentioned, is this idea of that we talk about plants, and also Fabricio talked about it, that we often talk about plants, but it's a very different agency, and Fabricio expressed this, of course, much better than I did, that we have a kind of plant blindness. And this is a topic that Van der Zee and Schussler have been defining, that they say that we have our very anthropocentric view on animals and plants, and that we often consider them unworthy of human consideration. And they describe this condition as plant blindness. And as we know, this plant here, we take it for granted. We don't know how it grows. We don't really see how it's reacting to light and to the environment or to the water that we give it. So we humans are not really on the same speed than plants, or plants are not on our speed. So we kind of need a new way of observing plants and, also appreciating plants. And I think what Christoph talked about is also this love for plants. And I think we have seen it also here, this ability to appreciate the aesthetic, but also the beauty and also the sort of, uniqueness of plants and nature in general. So these are the books actually that Fabricio and me are very inspired by Monica Gagliano. And there are many, many things, of course, now in plant physiology where people find out that, plants, trees in general, and also mycelium have this very sophisticated network and very sophisticated way of interacting between each other, but also interacting with animals and insects and interacting with the environment. And we're just at the beginning to try to find out what's going on there and what our impact is. When we talk about plants in art, of course, this is vast, and we could fill books and books, and there are already a lot of books out there. I just picked it up randomly. Some motifs, you can find it on Greek vases, you can find it in all the cultures. Plant depictions are almost everywhere, and of course, sometimes more detailed, sometimes a bit more abstract, sometimes more fantasy. And a big hero of mine is Hildegard von Bingen, which I think she's very famous here in Austria, especially when it comes to medical and herbal medicine. She was a German abbess, philosopher, writer, composer, and medical expert. And she already studied plants and described the medicinal powers, but also talked about the viriditas, which I think is something difficult to translate, but a kind of the power of the plant and its environment. Then we had before by Mr. Fossa very nice examples of plant illustration. Often it was linked to medical studies. Students of medicines had to take courses in plant studies. Here are just examples. And of course, the very famous, and I highly recommend if you are in Vienna and get to see this piece, this is marvelous, this is so fantastic, Große Rasenstück by Albrecht Dürer. the level of detail and the level of raffinesse in the plant depiction here is not just an artistic or botanical quality, but it's also, you really feel that the artist, Dürer himself, put a lot of love and care into the depiction of this. It's an absolute masterpiece. But of course, later on in the 17th century, we had the so-called botanical method. I think that's what we already heard today. And the concept of species was invented. And we don't have so much time, but a big important figure is Carl Linnaeus, who founded the botanical classification and invented the botanical taxonomy, also what Mr. Posser showed us before in the classification of plants. Then we can say in 17th century, botanical illustration really blossomed. I like this kind of wordplay. Here we see some example of Maria Sibylla Merian, who was a fantastic naturalist and scientific illustrator. She also showed us this connection between insects and plants. So not just a scientific illustration, but really a very artistic view of interaction between plant and animals. Or here, Nicolas Joseph Chacun, I'm not sure if you say Chacun or Chacun, yeah, from University of Vienna, also great illustrator and botanist. And there are, of course, many more. I could really keep talking about this, but I just choose a few. And another big hero of mine is Alexander von Humboldt, who was documenting plants already in their natural habitat and also talked about the interaction between plants, animal, and the environment. And he can really be considered one of the first to talk about biogeography, because he already observed on his many travels that there's a very strong human-induced climate change, and he already saw on his travels that how human intervention is destroying nature and what impact it has. So, of course, Humboldt is very famous, but I think we have to really also consider more also his relationship to Goethe, who advised him to look at plants not only from a scientific point of view, but also from an emotional point of view. So I think this is also something that can be inspiring to us. Many of you probably know Haeckel, who was this illustrator, artist, scientist in one persona, who made very kind of exact depiction of plants, but also put a lot of artistic imagination and innovation inside. And then also we don't have time to go into it, but plants as motifs is like all over art history, and in 20th century artists started to make themselves a bit more free from this exact depiction and go into more impressionist, like more what they felt about the plants and nature in general. But this goes too far. Just a short intro. I studied botany originally, but unfortunately never finished it. So I'm one of those students who never finished a study. I mean, I finished other studies, but not the botany study. So, but I always tried to put these classification schemes and botanical motifs back into the art practice. At that time, I did it with sculpture and some kind of, cut-out methods. But later, I went together with Laurent into this more interactive and trying to make people get involved in the creation of artworks where plants are playing a big, important role. And we noticed that by bringing in people into the artworks, you really have trigger a more emotional level. And people feel more somehow engaged in the work and feel maybe it's naive, but they sometimes feel more connected to plants and natural topics that you want to tell them. Here another work from '93, where we captured the pulse of a person in the installation and bioactivity of a plant. And then these two bioactivities together triggered artificial life in a microscope. And actually just next door here, Noah, are you here? Yes. Noah was so kind to give me these images. Please go and see this. It's just next door here. Noah made a very nice project. She studies at Interface Culture, completely new work where she was growing mycelium inside a kind of sculpture, and she picks up the bioactivity of the mycelium, and then the person in the installation can feel this bioactivity in the feet, and it's really a nice experience. You really somehow feel the activity of the of the living being in your body. And this is, I think, a real big power to engage people to understand more natural environments. Another thing that I think recently becomes very interesting is people, of course, have this longing for, connecting back to nature. And we heard it today after lockdown, we all felt like we get insane if we don't have nature, if we cannot go out. We needed to go out. We need to bring nature back to us. And Kian, who is also a student here, made this wonderful installation where she brings nature back into her private space, actually into her bed. And by laying in the bed, she changes the images of nature with her movement. And the images of nature are generated by an AI algorithm. So also, I think, a very nice idea of how nature comes back into your private garden. And two more examples here. Sam Ban, who has been graduating here a while ago, made this really wonderful video about a utopian world in the year 2399. I'm not sure, 7th generation, you said, Christoph? That's not yet, no? That's a bit earlier. Even further. Okay, so maybe we are going to be there in this year. And Sam has been proposing that at one point we will have so-called Luidlings. These are buildings that are at the same time trees and human, and they will be very, responsible, taking care of the environment. And it's a wonderful movie. Please watch it. I can only say here a few words about it. But so the young generation is already dreaming up a completely new utopian future where we are living very ecologically and, in this circular, like you say, what was the word? Circular society. Yeah, circular civilization. And as a last slide here, this is also a wonderful movie by Jessica Hausner. She's an Austrian filmmaker. She made this really fantastic movie a couple of years ago called Little Joe. And in her story, there is these bioengineers who are growing this plant called Little Joe. And this plant is expulsing some kind of perfume that makes people totally fall in love with the plants. And then the plant can only propagate by using people to propagate. And so also a very nice idea I find with this idea of planet love and how, the love relationship we can have to nature and to plants can be shown. So that would be it from my point of view. And I think we should really invigorate and this appreciation for love of plants and environment, as it has been already. I mean, this was there already in art history for many years. And we just, I think, need to get out, and that's what Fabricio really talked about, get out of this purely instrumental point of view towards nature and, get back on this more emotional, caring, relationship to our environment. That would be it from my point of view. And we have now a last presentation that was especially made for us by the Leisenhof. Maybe Fabricio, you could talk a little bit about the Leisenhof.
Exactly. So we have prepared. Sommerer has prepared. What's her last name? One second. Sommerer Heinz. She has prepared a little movie that she actually finished it today about Leisenhof. Sommerer, I think she works and lives up there in Leisenhof in the near the Petrinum, and she has created a 5-minute short movie where she explained the methods and demether methods and this idea of biodynamic systems that they are using in this garden called the Leisenhof. I mean, I can just introduce the Leisenhof for those who are not from Linz and they have no relationship with it. The Leisenhof horticulture is situated here in Linz, right at the base of the Postlimberg mountain. It was found in 1900 as a farming and gardening estate and pre-seminar Petrinum. Starting already? So let's watch it.
I think it has no sound and only subtitle. No, it does have sound, yeah.
Mit dem Bestreben, Pflanzen als Nahrung für Menschen anzubauen, stellt sich die Frage, wie dies sach- und wesensgemäß geschehen soll. Zu den allgemeinen Anforderungen des Gärtnerhandwerkes ist besonders zu gewährleisten, dass Nahrung auch Lebensmittel ist. Hier bieten die Hinweise Rudolf Steiners zur Landwirtschaft, die auch die Leitlinien zur biologisch-dynamischen Wirtschaftsweise bilden, grundlegende Ansätze. Eine stofflich-materialistische Auffassung der Natur und hier besonders der Bedürfnisse von Pflanze und Mensch greift zu kurz. In ihrer heutigen Ausformung als industrielle Gemüseproduktion zeitigt sie letztlich zerstörerische Auswirkungen. Erst in einem verlebendigten Boden gewachsene Pflanzen können den Menschen auch Leben vermitteln. Diese oberste Lage der Erdoberfläche findet sich bei entsprechenden Klimaverhältnissen in einem fruchtbaren Zustand. Gärtnerische und landwirtschaftliche Nutzung führen zu einer Einseitigkeit, die es auszugleichen gilt, ja darüber hinaus den Boden für den Anbau von Nahrungspflanzen besonders geeignet zu machen. Neben Fruchtfolge, Gründüngung, Humusaufbau und Pflanzenvergemeinschaftung ist es die Düngung, die dem Boden die dazu nötigen Kräfte vermittelt. Über das stoffliche Nährstoffeintrag hinaus kann ein gut bereiteter Kompost Prozesse wie etwa eine fortschreitende Bodengare, eine besonders günstige Bodenstruktur in Gang bringen. Und bei Anwendung der biologisch-dynamischen Kompostpräparate hilft er, frei strömende Wachstumskräfte besser im Boden zu verankern. Die Pflanze als einzelner Organismus ist auch Teil eines vielfältigen Bestandes, als Hervorbringung, als Organ der Erde zu sehen, die vermittelnd zwischen Erde und dem Ober- und Überirdischen steht. Dieses sich herausheben eines Lebendigen aus dem mineralisch Toten ist ein besonderer Wesenszug der Pflanze. Je stärker nun eine Lebendigkeit bereits den Untergrund durchzieht, in dem die Nahrungspflanze wurzelt, umso mehr kann sie auch an Lebenskraft aufbauen und ansammeln. Nahrungspflanzen begleiten den Menschen als Gemüse, Getreide und Obst zum Teil schon sehr lange. Gemüse und Getreide werden durch Samen vermehrt. Zu dem heute üblichen Einsatz von Hybridsaatgut wäre Folgendes zu sagen. Zu einem Teil sind es rein marktpolitische Überlegungen. Hybridsaatgut muss immer wieder bei dem Hersteller neu gekauft werden, aufgrund eingekreuzter Pollensterilität, ohne dass die Sorte im Anbau weitere Vorteile brächte. Zum anderen sind es Eigenschaften wie rasche Entwicklung, Gleichförmigkeit des Bestandes und hohe Erträge, die diese Sorte für den Erwerbsanbau interessant machen. Nun werden zur Gewinnung von Hybridsaatgut jedes Mal zwei eng geführte Inzuchtlinien eines Gemüses gekreuzt. Die Sorte ist immer wieder ganz neu, jugendlich. Ein Nachbau in zweiter Generation ergibt einen uneinheitlichen Bestand mit unterschiedlichsten Eigenschaften. Bei samenfesten Sorten verbinden sich die Züchtungsarbeit über Generationen mit bestimmten Eigenschaften fest mit der Sorte. Sie ist erwachsen. Das Bild in ihr hat sich gefestigt. Eine andere Schwächung dieses Kraftgebildes der Pflanze ergibt sich aus der heute gültigen Auffassung der Düngung, die eine vollkommene Versorgung mit pflanzenverfügbaren Nährstoffen fordert. Pflanzen sind in ihrer Jugendentwicklung tatsächlich auf die Zufuhr von Nährstoffen in gelöster Form angewiesen. Doch übernehmen sie ab einer bestimmten Entwicklungsstufe ihre Versorgung mit den benötigten Stoffen selbst. Die Art und Weise der Düngung entscheidet darüber, ob sich diese Wesensmöglichkeit der Pflanze ausprägt und so ein umfassendes Kraftgebilde bewirkt. Bei der menschlichen Ernährung ist es neben den Stoffen ja das Bild, dieser Ausschnitt aus dem Bereich, dem Gefüge des Lebendigen, das in der jeweiligen Nahrung abgebildet ist, das wir aufnehmen. Und wir erhalten unsere Kräfte aus der Lebenskraft, die im Aufgenommenen ist. Mit diesen Überlegungen ergibt sich der Rahmen, in dem wir unsere gärtnerische Arbeit verstehen und versuchen.
So if you want to go to this Leisenhof, it's not far from here, about 15-20 minutes walk up at the Böstlingberg, Demeter, and really fantastic idea of how to make sustainable and very ecological biodynamic farming. And that's also where we met Gabriele. And I think we have now a bit of time for short discussion or session. Fabricio, you want to start?
Yes, maybe I would like to continue from the idea of the video when we contacted the Klaus and Hannah and the people from the Leisenhof. We were trying to find a way to put together maybe a way in which to represent Leisenhof, and of course this is very difficult because there are so many layers. It's a very complex environment where it's not just about the soil, the garden, but like all the people that participate and all the rituals they have around. So it was very difficult, but when Sommerer decided to, I would like to do this video and join in, for us we thought it was a very interesting perspective, like to see the Leisenhof like through her eyes. And that seemed like quite an honest approach as well. And that was also like the idea why, of course, like when everybody, all of you with all your expertise and your years of expertise are coming here and are explaining your work in 10 or 15 minutes, of course, it's not possible to represent this, all this, but it's important to be here also because it inspires the students to approach you and to continue or to build some kind of like interdisciplinary approach to it. So I would like to maybe like open a question about like this idea of representation and inspiration and how to bring your expertise to the public. Maybe Martin, about like the exhibitions that you are building and the archive that you are building and how you are like showing it up, and for us like how important it is, to have you there explaining us your work, and sometimes and it gives a completely different perspective than if we just go and we look on Google or we just go to an exhibition and we see it by ourselves. What would you like to continue on this?
Yeah, maybe I could talk a little bit about something which was already mentioned by you. I think this under-representation of plants, that we just do not grade them or do not rate them something special, because usually they are inferior than animals. And I had once similar idea about this because I was at a congress in London and I had time for 3 hours, and I decided I would like to see the British Museum. And I was overwhelmed with these huge rooms and so many different things to see. And I was very fond of a kind of round trip. This was called, I think it still exists, A History of the Humankind, also in 100 objects. So you have a kind of guide, and you can go through all these rooms, and you just see 100 objects. I did not make all these 100 objects, but I had this booklet with me, and later I looked at all these objects and was interested how, and with each of these objects you get a little story. And finally I found out that there are quite a great variety of objects. There have been some animals, there have been artworks. I think the 100th object was a credit card, but not a single plant was there. And for a botanist, this is a kind of strange idea, and I thought maybe it's also a possibility to do it the other way around, to tell a history of mankind by choosing 100 plants. And I think this is equivalent, it's an equivalent approach, because we know that, or somehow, maybe it's also connected to our feelings that because we dress up with plants, we eat plants, we sleep in beds which are composed of plants, we have furniture, everything is with plants, and we just do not rate them as something special because we are so used to them in our daily way of living, that we do not think that it's extremely important. And also if you think about historical developments, even if you think about conflicts between people, between states, very often plants play a crucial role. If you think about slavery, I think only plants have raised this kind of suppression of people because of plants which some people wanted to exploit, and so other people had to work on these slavery farms and produce the profit for single people. And I think we could give those plants a different role in our life if we are more conscious about this.
I'm glad you brought up this exhibition, which I also saw, and which is kind of an expression of the industrialization society, civilization, that we have to overcome. Yes, I'm pretty critical of that exhibition because of the reasons you also mentioned. And I think we have to develop a totally different affinity relationship to plants. At the MAC, there is an exhibition, Climate Care, as the biggest exhibition of the Vienna Biennale, and one of the key projects is actually called How to Cure Plant Blindness by the artist Rebecca Mayo. And it's a key project. You can find it online also. It's very interesting because she asked people basically to rub trees and frottage in French, and then she kind of put all these patterns of the rubbing on textiles and we exhibited textiles. Yeah, but I also want to. And I want to draw your attention to a key concept. Many of you probably know it. It's called resonance. Resonance, by the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa. And why is that so important? Because everybody can develop a special relationship. Resonance-based resonance, it's basically we are having a conversation where you feel there is resonance, and you have other conversations where there's no resonance. You're looking forward to a concert with your favorite singer, and suddenly the audience is cold, there is no resonance. Or it's the opposite. There's huge resonance. And you can also develop resonance not only to other people, but also to nature, to artworks, yeah, to objects, and to plants, of course. And this is a key concept. I have huge resonance with trees and other plants. It's part of my life. I don't have the same kind of relationship as Monica demonstrated, but I have a similar kind of relationship via resonance. Yeah. So I really draw your attention to that book. Read it. I read it 3 times. It has 800 pages. It's absolutely worth. It's a special experience. But I want to bring up something very controversial, and I would be interested in your views about that. What we saw, I loved what we saw from the special Leisenhof, or what is the name? Yeah, it's terrific. But on the other hand, I'm also a fan of vertical farming in cities with digital precision farming, and kind of using the landscape, the kind of regenerating soil, yeah, in rural areas, also to allow for better carbon storage, which is very important for the future. And the soil also has to recover, especially where you have very intense kind of agro-industrial agriculture. So vertical farming, I would be interested in your views. Why I'm raising this, because we need to move from a meat-eating society to a plant-eating society. So food plants are key. Some of you know the book Drawdown. It's a very important book about 80 solutions to kind of draw down from the carbon in the atmosphere, which is 418 ppm, parts per million currently, and we have to come down again. It still goes up. Among the 80 measures, number 4 listed in terms of global effectiveness is a plant-based diet for as many people as possible. So in all those cities, kind of with millions of people, we need, of course, a lot of more plant-based diets, which means a lot has to grow. You need very intense agriculture, and you rather do it in vertical farming than kind of exploiting the soil even more. But I know it's controversial, and that's the reason why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, for me, I think these are 2 things, like the approach that has the Leisenhof Gärtnerei and vertical farming in cities, that can exist at the same time and have to exist at the same time, because we have to make the cities greener, otherwise we will collapse in future summers, I guess. And of course we have to treat the soil that is already producing vegetables, fruits and stuff better or as good as Leisenhof Gärtnerei does. So there are 2 things that have to exist together for me. And what I wanted to say at the former speakers is, for me, the most fun part of my work when I do workshops is to tell those little stories about plants. A lot of people come to my workshops and say, I just want to know everything or something because I know nothing. For me, it's green and everything looks the same. And after my workshop, they realize, okay, this is not just only a tree, more trees, a wood, or a little plant, another little plant, and a meadow. It's like every plant has a little character and a story to tell, and teachings for us. And there are plants that are very sympathy to one person and others not, and we cannot explain why. It's a fact. So I think the best way is to combine, like vertical gardening in cities and the things Leisenhof-Gärtnerei do, you can also combine information about plants, stories about plants, knowledge about plants, plus feelings and emotions with plants. I think that always comes together and goes together because we are trained to get the information first, and after that we can feel a little bit free and we interpret things. But first always have to be some information, otherwise we don't know what to do. That's my guess. But if you know something about a plant, then you can respect it, and then you can like it more, or choose if you like it or not. That comes together.
Maybe I could add a little idea also to this. I mean, if you look at plants, they are more or less the natural antagonists against carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere, because they feed on the carbon dioxide. And if you let them grow, if you don't put asphalt everywhere, and if you provide space for plants to grow, then in the long run you will also have a kind of feedback control, and the carbon dioxide atmosphere, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere will be consumed by the plants, and you have a kind of feedback control, and you could enter again this kind of cycling as you presented today. I just see one problem, and this problem are we ourselves, because isn't it like this that so if you just look at nature, there are hardly any organisms known which produce something which keeps longer than their own life. So it's only us that we try to produce something which is permanent. And I think it's also especially in the field of arts. Everybody is kind of fond of things if they survive our own lives, and we want to leave something for the future. And this is not what nature is. Nature always creates itself new, and more or less nothing is left from the individual. And probably this is also a kind of special attitude just we have, and which is not so common in the nature aside from the humans.
Thank you. Okay, we maybe have time for one last short question, and then unfortunately we have to cut, but we will continue the discussion and having tricks while the performance is happening.
Thank you. So I have a little question. Why do we need technology to reconnect to nature? This is what I ask myself listening to Monica.
I mean, do we really need technology? I don't know. But technology can open up new avenues also in our relationship to nature, as we heard from Australia. We also have our current exhibitions at the MAC. We have the sound of glaciers, unfortunately melting glaciers, as we know. But of course, you get into a new relationship with it. Yeah? All the observation of wild nature in animals, though I prefer plants, can give you also a different notion.
But one thing is, I read the Dasgupta report a couple of weeks ago, and the world is planning big reservoirs for nature, for oceans and also for territories. So places where humans are not allowed to be, you know. And this is, I ask myself, if I go to the forest, I have my opportunities, my technologies. I am my technology of myself, and this is enough to be connected to that what nature could be or is for me. And now we have a third player, and the third player is technologies, sensors, microphones, headphones, and all that stuff. And this is an interesting question. I mean,
maybe, this might be just a feeling, but when I see now students sitting here, and I know that many of them are also understanding, like what you, Mr. Prosser, said before, if you know something about nature, and it could be mediated nature that you find out, the mycelium, like Noah is doing, the mycelium is growing and there's some biosignals, and by looking at it and by extracting this data, you start to think more about nature. So I think we are living now in this mediated nature time, and it can help us to reconnect back to nature.
For me, if I may have a comment, my idea is also like not the idea of using technology to connect to nature, but also to represent our relationship with nature, or this very singular relationship that we have with eventually a specific species or nature itself, and how this could be represented for an audience or just to share it with your friends or the people you love, and there is where eventually technology or artifice or art play a role. If you don't make a difference between these, then it's very easy to see why eventually it is necessary, or also like this driven force that sometimes make us, express or love for nature or for whatever in artistic ways or in artistic formats.
I have a very simple answer to that. My most beloved series in television, and I don't watch a lot of television, is Universum. Why? Because it's a kind of low-carbon way to see the wonders, the beauty of nature, of animals, of plants, etc., without having to travel there, pay a lot of money, have a huge ecological footprint. It's very elitist anyway. So for me, this is a perfect example of why technology is important also to bring us closer to nature, and especially wild nature. Yeah.
I think we need to stop now, no? I think, Antonio, we have to finish now, no? Yeah, so I get some signs here from the regie that we have to finish, but it was wonderful to have you here, and we have to continue, and I'm so happy that we now have the Leonardo Laser Talk format, and this will be one of our main topics, I think, finding out ways of how to continue this discussion and see how art, technology, and nature can play a role. Thank you. So please come back here and finish. Can we finish the drinks here? Yeah, so session is continuing here with drinks and waltz. Thank you.